Tax evasion and avoidance is a very complex, multi-dimensional problem requiring concerted effort and agreement by the state to ensure binding agreements that allow effective revenue collection methods. Remember we did an interview this week with Oxfam and their recent inequality report that was entitled Public Good or Private Wealth illustrates the magnitude and depth of the problem of tax evasion, highlighting it as a major hindrance in the economic growth of most countries, and that effective collection would go a very long way in producing more equal societies, also contributing towards key areas of need such as education and health, for example. Well, public policy analyst, I've just renamed you. Public policy analyst TK Pooe is with us this morning, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about this. TK, good to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
All right, so Oxfam calling for wealth tax to balance inequality. Do you think that's the answer?
I think it's part of it, especially if you look at the developing countries. Again, that distinction between avoidance and evasion, it's actually quite a blurred line. Well, I think what they're calling for, especially on the continent, would be an issue of saying, listen, there's massive amounts of evasion. In the field I look at, which is extractive, which is your mining industry, the Thabo Mbeki report actually stated that if you actually had proper tax systems within a lot of these African countries, a lot of them would actually not need foreign aid, because the amount of money leaving because of evasion is, I think it was like 300 billion, I think, to that level.
I think that was about the number that they were
to quoting. That level. So just imagine how much schools and how much you can actually improve your healthcare. So it's an issue of saying, if we had proper systems, at least it's one of the things you'll need to actually make sure states are able to address the problems of economic underdevelopment in a lot of them.
Yeah. So if we take a look at South Africa in that, I had always thought that our policies around tax evasion were quite strong. Or are they not strong enough?
We actually did a study on this last year at the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership School under Professor Vusi Kumede, where I also assume that, listen, most of us are scared to owe SARS anything, so we make sure. But you have to understand, a lot of individuals and companies, what they'll tend to do, especially your bigger multinational companies, is they will, while paying tax here, they'll just basically say, listen, remember our headquarters are not here, so that's somewhere like the British Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands, where tax is between 15% and lower. And it makes it hard for SARS to say, listen, how can we fully tax you when you're not really based here? So it's actually an issue bigger than SARS. So we can say at an individual level, for some, not every individual, SARS has a very good grip on it. But I think for about 1.9 people were named in the Panama Papers. These are people that are able to go to tax companies and audit firms and say, listen, I think the word they use, make magic happen, where you can say, how can you basically make sure you can slice me off a bit more than I have to pay SARS? So while SARS is on top of most things, this is one where it's bigger than SARS.
Yeah, we were saying that it's quite incredible how clever people are to try and get around this tax system. We got a little bit of a glimpse, and we are getting a glimpse into what happened at Bosasa. Agriti talking to us about how his wife was paid. She didn't even work for the company just to get him out of a certain tax bracket, and therefore he was taxed less. And we're talking hundreds of thousands and then into the millions and tens of millions that is disappearing, and people are just getting away with all of this. And I almost feel like when I owe 5 rand, I've got the guy knocking on my door like, come on, pay up, I don't know, it's just not fair, is it?
I think it speaks to the complexity of the issue. I think there's always a common refrain when you speak to people saying, listen, we all know, especially on the continent, the issues are, we know that politician is corrupt, and they'll do a forensic audit, and you tend to find that the guy has very little assets. And I guess it speaks to the smartness of it, where, look, a lot of practitioners will tell you, never put anything under your name, put it in your wife's name, your sister's name. And that's where it becomes very complex, because the understanding is, I'm paying you. So that's what SARS can look after, say, listen, it's Miss Leanne, this is what she's paying. But everything else, they find it very hard to get around. And there's also that problem of tax is such a personal issue. No one wants their issue to be, I think, known publicly. So it's always a sensitivity in dealing with it. And actually, that's one of the reasons why even Donald Trump came to power, because what he was arguing is to say, listen, there's this company named Google. everybody knows Google is based in the United States, but their tax jurisdiction is actually an island, meaning they put most of their money there. And I think that's what a lot of individuals do. So the complexity of it is such that I think a lot of treasuries around the continent, around the world, find it very hard to actually pin it down. Because, I mean, these guys are hiring the best of the best.
So that is answering my question. I mean, we're talking about an African issue in this interview, but it's not an African issue. This is a global issue. This happens all around the world.
Yes, I mean, if a country like America is debating or having problems with tax evasion, how much more a country where, I think we did our study, we were actually looking at issues of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, I think there's a 2014 report saw that I think they lost close to 21 billion US dollars. Now, just imagine the crisis they're in now. And imagine what they could have got had they actually had the proper systems in place to actually tax mines. And I think there's an even bigger boggling a number, which always I think makes it very hard for us policy people to understand, is if you actually looked at the total value of the DRC's minerals, I think comes to a number of 24 trillion US dollars.
Sure.
That's bigger than the economy of Europe and the United States put together. But because the DRC doesn't have a very good tax system in place to actually tax companies, what you tend to find is a lot of politicians at national and local level treat those mining or those extractive industries as personal slush funds.
Wow. Yeah.
And the person who suffers at the end of the day is one where a lot of these places don't have hospitals or basic schools.
There you go. So let's dig a little deeper into that. And I want to sort of have a look and understand how badly the economy is affected by tax evasion. I mean, if we have to sort of give an example of tax evasion and how it has had a direct impact on, I mean, perhaps you can give us the South African example.
Okay, well, the study we did, I think at UNISA with the Thabo Mbeki schools, we said, if we looked at the area of Marikana, now look at what the company made vis-a-vis what the community lacked. Now, and then from that simple sum was to say, listen, you need a very good hospital, you need a good schooling system. Now, add all that up, and you tend to find that there's always like a shortfall to say, listen, I know you're making X amount of rands. So the problem of quantifying it, like you're saying, this is where it becomes very hard. So you have to find different formulas to do it. The one we use was to say, listen, if you actually have to quantify what a community needs, your basic schooling, your housing, and also the loss you make, because mining is one of those industries where environmentally you're going to lose. And the financial services makes it so hard because it's very hard to measure the amount of money coming in and out of this stock exchange daily. And the fact that we can't quantify it, or there's I think many sums to it, means that you have to actually think the worst case scenario is that you're losing over 30 billion? Maybe in a year, that's a good year if you're quantifying it, or more. And if you had to take that 30 billion, the question is, what could you have done with that money in the community? And I think that's the easiest way to think about it.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's a horrible thing to think about and heartbreaking to know where we could be if it was used properly. There was a 2017 report entitled "The Plunder Route to Panama." You mentioned Panama. How African oligarchs steal from their countries. So, I mean, these reporters in 7 African countries investigated the looting of the elite. And, you know, these reporters had a look at that, and particularly, I think, you know, different countries like the DRC. Whatever happened to people that were implicated in this?
The odd thing about that report was that it actually showed you that if you have the reins, and I think some of the people listed in there was actually the Guptas as well. If you actually have the reins of power in a country, it makes it very hard to pinpoint one individual, because what tends to happen with these people is that they know very well that, look, we have to make sure that every SARS version in every African country is crippled, so you never allow them to really do their job. And so it makes it very hard to say, listen, who do you go after? And what I do not happen with the people is that a lot of those journalists, I think 2 of them were either arrested or came close to being arrested, but the guilty parties were never arrested. They've been classified as they're called the untouchables. There's certain people you don't touch in the state. And you can touch journalists, but you can't touch those people. So nothing really has come from it because they're protected by the state itself.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some mining companies, and this is where it starts getting very blurry, this line, because yes, you pay your taxes, but there is such corruption that's happening around us that you almost feel, you know, why should I bother anymore? I mean, if you look at something like, again, this was in the DRC, and I think this was uncovered, the a Canadian mining company, First Quantum, they basically had, I think, $60 million that they owed in these for their copper mining operation in the DRC. It was then told to pay the tax director $4 million. They passed on $6 million to the government, and then they could keep the rest. And it was fine. It was just a write-off. So that's what you were saying. Who you know and you get away with it. You know, some people are lining their pockets and the others, well, you know, don't worry about it. It's okay. Give me the money and you can go free.
And I think that's what speaks. I think Richard Byrd makes a point of saying tax is actually one of the greatest tools you can have for actually developing a country. And the very fact that this is where we have to give the South African government some credit, especially SARS, that they've actually been trying to go on the continent to actually try to get almost like a continent-wide agreement to say, listen, and let's actually help each other when it comes to making sure that tax doesn't leave the continent. But the fact is, if people treat their country like it's their own spaza shop, there's very little you can do. That the example of the DRC, as we said, everybody knows, I'm sure you've heard where every political debate, DRC is the richest country when it comes to minerals on the continent. Being rich and having the right systems are two very different things.
Indeed.
And one only just has to look at the issue of the Panama. I mean, these Cayman Islands, even Panama, these are actually very small islands. And the only thing they have got right is that they know that their policy is, we are going to come to you, we're going to advertise our services, that you're going to come, leave your money in our country, and we will protect you by all means, which shows you that if you've got the right policy and institutions in place, you can actually build the wealth of a country. And I think that's where a lot of our African countries, even South Africa to a certain extent, where we really do need to get, we have to really sharpen ourselves to say, listen, tax is, because I know, like you're saying, the issue with tax is when you see people get away with it, you start to feel as a citizen, then what's the point?
Yeah.
Everything I make, please just pay me via brown envelope. Don't declare it. Don't take it to SARS. And once people start not believing in a tax system, what tends to happen is that undermines a whole country. And I think most South Africans are at that level where, like you were saying, I think with Mr. Greasy, where like, wait, by law, you're actually not supposed to keep 60 million in hard cash in any place. I think it's the Reserve Bank's prerogative says that. But these people can have their own version of their own Reserve Bank. Then why must I now come forward and declare? I mean, it's where people are going. It
does. It brings down that morale within people. And you just think to yourself, you know, why am I acting like the good citizen when everyone around me seems to not be doing that, including our politicians? I mean, we keep referring to Panama. I mean, our South African politicians were fingered in these Panama reports. Whatever happened there?
I think the last report, I think, was from 2018, where SARS said they'd retrieved, I think it was 3.3 billion South African rand, but more work needed to be done. Because what I always argue is to say, if it's off one financial year, it's something else. But how long have you been there? And we need to actually backdate it, because you and I both know if we owed SARS, they would go all the way back to make sure that every cent was paid.
Absolutely. Just finally, it's also company tax. You know, this Oxfam report, and many people talking to the fact that South Africa, during apartheid, companies were paying a lot more tax, and now it seems to have gone down by plus 10%. I mean, the actual corporate tax was 50. It's now wherever it's sitting now. I think
it's around the 30s or 32.
Something like that. I mean, why? And do you think this is also a big problem?
And now, this is a problem every country will face, even Donald Trump will face, and that issue of saying, when a company tells you, listen, if you want to tax me 50%, then I'm just going to go base my company somewhere else. So it's almost like the give and take.
Yeah.
And this is why I think when it comes to tax, the numbers are great. I mean, in the policy, we have to have those discussions, but we almost have to have that discussion to actually moralize it. To say, listen, you as a company, you're deriving a great value from being here, and you're getting something which we can never get back. And I think maybe the debate, especially to include the rest of South Africans, we actually need to take it to a lot of companies to actually say moralize it, to say, how do you think we are supposed to really become a better state, go into a middle income, if not a developed country, if you don't actually want to pay your fair share of it? Every individual in South Africa, via VAT, we all have to pay our pound of flesh. But until we actually moralize it and their companies actually see the wrong that they are doing, they'll forever just give the government the excuse of saying, listen, you're going to charge me 35, well, I'll just go base it maybe in the Seychelles or in Mauritius, where I'm only paying 20%.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it very hard. But I think government also has to come forward and say, listen, this is where we stand, because you do need these minerals. And I think that's where, as you're saying, political will is lacking, and I think a bit of vision in terms of what tax does. Because a lot of times when you speak to politicians, they believe, look, as long as SARS is full, life goes on as normal. They don't quite understand that this is a long-term thing. We're not going to have these minerals or even the financial services sector forever. And I think that's where the grey is, that a lot of people are not understanding tax can be a powerful tool for actually getting a country right.
All right, that's TK Pooe talking to us here about tax and tax evasion and some of these issues around it. And I know that you've been commenting quite a bit as well. We're looking forward to reading some of those. We'll do those after the news at 8 here on Morning Live. TK, again, thank you very, very much for talking to us. Let's take a break. When we return, we've got your news at 8 and also